It was a Tuesday morning, sometime just after 8, and the world seemed like it hadn't yet made up its mind about the day. The sun had barely risen above the trees, casting a soft orange blush over the lake, and a thin curtain of mist clung to the water like it didn't want to leave. I stepped onto my porch in a faded blue bathrobe and mismatched socks, cradling a mug of coffee between both hands, steam curling into the cool air. For a second, just a second, everything felt right. The kind of right that doesn't announce itself, just slips in quietly like a well-worn habit. I remember thinking, maybe even whispering to myself, that mornings like this made everything worth it. The silence. The solitude. The aching crawl out of grief. It felt earned. Then I heard Bill's voice. "Alex," he shouted, and there was something in his tone I'd never heard before, not just urgency, but fear. Not panic exactly, but something sharp-edged and real. The kind of voice that makes your heart misstep, like a record skipping on a quiet night. I looked up, squinting in the direction of his voice, trying to piece together why my 70-something neighbor, who usually never raised his voice above a chuckle, was now calling to me with such intensity. That's when the mug slipped. Or maybe I dropped it. I honestly can't remember. All I know is the hot coffee spilled across the porch boards like spilled blood in a crime scene, quick, messy, staining. The ceramic shattered with a sharp crack that echoed louder than it should have. I didn't even look down. My feet were already moving. I crossed the small yard in what felt like 2 strides, still barefoot, the grass damp and cold against my soles. Bill was standing near the road, his arms stiff at his sides, jaw tight. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost but didn't want to admit it out loud. I followed his gaze, heart already pounding in my chest like a second heartbeat, and that's when I saw it. A sign. Bright red. Bold white letters. Staked right into the center of my front lawn like it belonged there. For sale, urgent, $180,000. It was angled just enough to face the street perfectly, like it had been measured for maximum visibility. Like it wanted the world to know, loud and clear, that my sanctuary, my place of healing, was up for grabs. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, blinking like maybe if I stared long enough, the letters would rearrange themselves into something else. Maybe a prank, or a mistake, or just a bad dream. But the letters stayed. The plastic sign wobbled in the breeze, creaking on its thin metal legs. And then, like a stage play where the lights come up all at once, I noticed them. A couple. Middle-aged. Mid-50s maybe. She wore a blue vest and capri pants, clipboard tucked under one arm and a bright yellow measuring tape extended as she walked toward the front steps. He was behind her, wearing a salmon-colored polo and boat shoes, phone raised like a real estate agent taking listing photos. They were strolling casually across my property, like they already owned the place. She bent down, examined the wooden step leading up to the porch, muttered something to herself, and scribbled it down. He took a photo of the door, then turned to the yard. "That tree's too close to the house," he said. "We'll probably have it taken out. I want a wraparound deck." I took a single step forward, not even aware of what my body was doing. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the rising panic from cracking my voice. They both turned toward me like I'd interrupted a lunch order, not like I was the current and rightful owner of the home they were treating like a fixer-upper. "Oh," the woman said, blinking. "Are you the, current occupant?" "Current occupant." I repeated, the words landing like punches I hadn't braced for. "This is my house. I live here." The man chuckled politely, like I was someone who hadn't gotten the memo. "Well, it won't be long, right? I mean, closing's next month, right? They said 30 days. My throat went dry. "Who said that?" They glanced at each other. The woman looked down at her clipboard. "The HOA office. Sharon Mitchell. She's the one who told us the property had been cleared for sale and was approved for fast-track processing. She even showed us the paperwork. It's already listed with a private network, they just haven't gone public yet. We got the tip through a friend." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Cleared for sale? Fast-track processing? Listed? What the hell did that even mean? No, I said, the panic now bubbling into something rawer, hotter. "I didn't list this place. I never signed anything. I didn't give anyone permission. This is my house." The man raised an eyebrow, more confused than combative. "Well, you might want to take that up with Sharon, then. We're just following the process." Everything seemed above board. Above board? I looked at the sign again. My name wasn't on it. There was a phone number, one I didn't recognize, and a web address that redirected to a portal I'd never seen before. The whole thing felt like a mirage, or worse, a carefully crafted performance. I turned to Bill, hoping, praying, he had some kind of explanation. But he just shook his head slowly, his mouth a grim, tight line. "I saw her out here this morning before sunrise," he said quietly. "She was alone. Taped something to your door." Next thing I knew, the sign went up. I blinked. Taped what? We walked back together toward the porch. I was moving like someone in a dream, feet barely registering the steps. There, half flapping in the breeze, was a clear plastic sleeve pinned to the front door with blue painter's tape. Inside it was a letterhead I didn't recognize, something with the HOA logo at the top, and a list of bullet points I could barely focus on. Notice of non-compliance review. Foreclosure clause activated. Authorized listing pursuant to Section 11(b). Section 11(b). What the hell was Section 11(b)? I pulled the paper out, hands shaking, and scanned it. Legal jargon. Citations. Property code violations. Missed compliance deadlines. Failure to respond to certified mail, which I had never received. Somewhere in the middle of the second paragraph, the words temporary transfer of management authority jumped out at me like a flashing red light. It was a lie. Or if it wasn't a lie, it was some twisted version of a rule that had been buried in 10-point font, buried in a booklet no one actually read. And Sharon Mitchell, had used it. Not just to enforce a rule, but to take my home. The walls of the cabin suddenly felt 100 miles away. The lake, once comforting, felt like a trap. The porch under my feet groaned like it too was trying to warn me. I felt a wave of something crash over me, not just panic, but a deeper betrayal. A sense that everything I had worked to rebuild since the divorce had been quietly, efficiently dismantled while I'd been sipping coffee and waving at neighbors. I looked down at the shattered mug on the boards. World's okayest man. That had been the joke. Danielle had thrown it into a box during the move-out like it was an afterthought. But I'd kept it. Held onto it like a thread of identity. And now even that thread felt like it had been cut. I looked back up at the couple, who were now examining the back of the house. They weren't malicious. Just detached. They didn't see a home. They saw square footage and renovation plans. I wasn't a person to them. I was a placeholder. And suddenly, I understood something. This wasn't just a clerical error. It wasn't even a power trip. It was a system. And Sharon had learned how to bend it to her will. And I had let it happen. Quietly. Politely. Just like Danielle had said. You never fight for anything. But as I stood there, breathing hard, watching strangers measure the steps of my own front porch, something changed in me. A click. A switch. A steel rod rising in my spine. This was my home. I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. Not this time. Not ever again. Can I ask what exactly you were doing on my property? My voice came out sharp, more like a bark than a question. It surprised even me. The couple standing on my lawn turned around in perfect, unbothered sync, smiles painted on their faces like they were auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. The woman was mid-50s, tan like she'd just come back from a cruise, wearing linen pants and a pastel sweater knotted around her shoulders. The man beside her, stockier with salt and pepper hair, looked like the kind of guy who said things like early bird gets the worm while polishing his golf clubs. "Oh, you must be Mr. Thompson," she chirped brightly, extending a hand that I didn't take. "We're the Johnsons. Just paid the deposit with the HOA this morning." I blinked. The air shifted. Deposit. The word hung in my mouth like smoke. I don't understand. This place isn't for sale. The man chuckled as if I'd just told the best joke he'd heard all year. "Well, not anymore, obviously. The HOA president told us you'd agreed to sell. Said you were relocating to Florida. Something about the climate and your health." "My, what?" I croaked. "No, that's not. I never agreed to any of that." He pulled out his phone, casually tapping a few times before tilting the screen toward me. "Look, it's all here. Contract, deposit receipt, transfer timeline. Pretty airtight stuff. Sharon handled everything." I stared at the document displayed on his phone. There it was, my name, my address, the HOA's letterhead, and a signature that looked eerily like mine, but I knew, in my gut, that I'd never signed it. Then, as if the situation hadn't already tripped into madness, they walked right past me. Not around me. Not asking permission. Just, past. Like I wasn't even standing there. Like I was a misplaced garden gnome. The woman wandered toward my porch steps, pausing to peek through the front window like she was scouting decor ideas. Then, to my horror, she reached for the doorknob. I rushed forward, heart hammering in my chest. Hey, you can't just go in there," I shouted. She gave me a patronizing glance over her shoulder. "Oh, it's fine. We just wanted to get a feel for the space." A feel for this is my house. The man raised a hand in a mock gesture of calm. "Relax. It's all covered under Section 14B of the HOA agreement. Transitional Occupancy Access Clause. Very standard." "Transitional, what?" My voice cracked. "I never agreed to any of this. I'm not moving. I'm not going anywhere." The woman had already stepped inside. I could see her through the living room window, phone out, snapping pictures. She was photographing my bookshelf. My bookshelf. "We'll obviously give you time to vacate," she said, not even turning around. 30 days, right? That's what Sharon said. I stood on the porch, fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I fumbled for my phone. My fingers were numb. I scrolled to the contact list, found Sharon Mitchell, and hit dial. The line rang once. She picked up. "Alex," she said, her voice too calm, too measured. "I figured you'd call." "What is going on?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are people in my house. They're saying they bought it. They're taking pictures." She sighed, like I was an inconvenience. "You violated too many regulations. The board had to take action. We followed protocol." "You can't sell my house," I shouted. "It's mine." There was a pause. "Not anymore," she said. Then, click. The call ended. I stared at the phone like it had betrayed me. Like maybe it would start explaining everything if I held it long enough. The silence afterward was deafening. My legs buckled beneath me and I sank onto the porch step. The wooden plank felt rough and cold under me, like the world was reminding me that this place, this home, was no longer safe. No longer mine. It felt like the divorce all over again. That same hollow collapse inside my chest. The same disbelief, the same dread. The day Danielle packed her bags and stood at the door, her voice like frost, "You're a great guy, Alex. You just never fight for anything." I hadn't fought then. I hadn't said a word. I just watched her walk out the door and take half my life with her. And now, it was happening again. The Johnsons eventually left, chattering about light fixtures and flooring preferences, but it didn't matter. They'd already left their fingerprints everywhere. The air inside felt wrong. Off. Like it had been disturbed, flipped inside out. I walked through the living room, my feet dragging. I touched the arm of my recliner, the one I'd spent nights curled up in, watching bad TV and trying not to think about how lonely I was. I looked at the framed photo of my father and me on the wall. We were smiling, holding up matching fishing poles. I had hung that photo my first night in the cabin, hands still shaking from the move, thinking maybe this place could be my fresh start. Now, the memory felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The kitchen table still bore the faint water ring from the night I signed my divorce papers. I remembered making my first solo dinner there, canned soup and toast. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Now? It felt like none of it had ever really been mine at all. Outside, I noticed movement. Neighbors were gathering, just far enough to be safe, just close enough to watch. Mrs. Park stood behind her minivan with her kids, shielding them like I was something dangerous. A couple walking their dog picked up the pace when they passed my yard. One woman I barely recognized was filming me from her porch, her phone held up like a weapon. I felt like a sideshow. Like a lesson. Don't challenge Sharon. Don't rock the boat. See what happens when you do? My ears burned. Shame. Rage. Disbelief. All of it tangled together. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something rising. A warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. That night, I sat in the dark. No lights. No TV. Just me and the low, mechanical hum of the fridge. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just stared at the walls that once comforted me, now foreign and shadowed. It felt like I was squatting in my own life. Danielle's voice echoed again in my head. "You never fight for anything." And I realized, with gut-deep clarity, she had been right. But I couldn't be that man anymore. I couldn't let this happen, not again. That glowing red sign outside wasn't just a sale notice, it was a flag. A declaration that my life was up for grabs. And if Sharon could do it to me, she could do it to anyone. I decided that night, I wouldn't be erased quietly. The next morning, my body ached like I'd been in a fight. My legs were sore, my head pounding, and my stomach churned every time I saw that red sign still staked in my lawn. But I got up, threw on a hoodie, grabbed an old notebook and pen, and I started knocking on doors. The first few slammed quickly. A young couple whispered apologies through a cracked door. "We can't get involved," they said. "We've got kids." One guy, someone I'd grilled ribs with not a year ago, just shook his head. "Don't bring this to my door, man." Their fear was louder than their words. It wasn't just about Sharon anymore. It was about survival. They'd all learned how to keep their heads down. I almost gave up. Until I knocked on Bill's door. He let me in without speaking. Just pointed to the recliner across from his. We sat in silence for a while before he finally said, "I tried once." I looked up. "Tried what?" He rubbed his forehead. "Fighting back. Last year. She fined me $500 for the mailbox paint. I appealed. Wrote letters. Got code enforcement visits a month later. She doubled the fines. I couldn't breathe in my own home." He handed me a slip of paper. "Rodriguez might talk. He's in a complex off Route 9. She did worse to him." I drove there that afternoon. The place smelled like old pizza and mildew. Rodriguez answered the door warily, but when I told him who I was, his shoulders relaxed. He invited me in. Boxes lined the walls. The couch was sunken. But on the walls were photos of a little girl with tight curls and a megawatt smile. "That's Isabella," he said softly. 6 now. He handed me a photo. She took her first steps on our old porch. That blue one, with the swing. Sharon said the door was the wrong color. Said it violated community standards. His hand trembled as he placed the photo back down. I paid fine after fine. Then the foreclosure letter came. I didn't even get a hearing. His voice cracked. "We built our life there." She took it like it was paperwork. I looked around his apartment, at the boxes, the cramped furniture, the bulb planter on the windowsill. And then I looked at him. "I'm not letting her take mine," I said. His eyes met mine. And he nodded. Slowly. But with something burning in them. That night, I went home and tore the red sign out of my lawn. Tomorrow, I'd start the real fight. $50 a week. Rodriguez's voice was quiet, almost like he was embarrassed by the number. That's what I was trying to budget for repairs. One thing at a time. A fence post, mailbox, porch rail. I painted until my hands cramped. But every time I fixed something, she found another violation. Overgrown hedge. Wrong shade of gray on the door. Too many wind chimes. He looked down at the photo again. It was of his daughter, Isabella, tiny, bright-eyed, with curly hair framing her round face. She was holding a candy cane in one hand and a plush snowman in the other, grinning wide. "Now she asks me why Santa doesn't come to apartments," he said, voice cracking. I told her it's because apartments don't have chimneys. She believed me. I don't know how long that'll last. I couldn't respond. My throat had gone tight, the words caught somewhere between heartbreak and fury. I had come here thinking maybe Rodriguez would give me intel. Instead, he'd given me weight, the unbearable truth of what Sharon had done, not just in documents and notices, but in the private, sacred corners of people's lives. Later that day, I climbed the faded stairwell of a nursing apartment complex on the east side of town. The walls were painted a sterile beige, the kind of color that apologizes for existing. The hallway smelled like bleach and canned soup. Faint murmurs came from televisions behind closed doors. When Mrs. Johnson opened the door to apartment 2B, her face lit up for a brief moment. "Oh, Alex," she said, eyes softening. "You look tired." I stepped inside her room. It wasn't really an apartment. It was barely the size of a motel suite. There was a twin bed against the wall, a chipped side table with a flickering lamp, and one single rocking chair near the window. The blinds were drawn tight against the sun, fluorescent lights above buzzing like mosquitoes trapped in plastic. Cardboard boxes lined every wall, stacked and labeled in shaky handwriting. Books. Kitchen. Guest room. There was no guest room anymore. Just the memory of one. She saw me glance at the boxes and gestured toward the rocking chair. "That's the only thing I brought from my house," she said. "My husband built it. Measured the angle just right so it would creak softly when you thought hard." He said the sound helped him think. She ran her fingers along the wooden armrest with reverence, the way someone might touch a gravestone. From a nearby shelf, she pulled down a dusty photo album and sat beside me, flipping it open with care. Each page had handwritten captions beneath faded photos. In one, a girl stood in a garden surrounded by daisies. The light in the photo was soft, golden. "I planted those because my granddaughter loved daisies," she said. But marigolds were the regulation flower, according to Sharon. Something about visual consistency and neighborhood harmony. I got a warning first. Then the fines came. I tried calling the board, left messages. Never heard back. Next thing I knew, I had 30 days to vacate or face legal action. Her voice trembled. "I'm 75, Alex. I don't understand this new way of punishing people." She clutched the album tighter, her hands shaking now. "I saved this. And the chair. That's it. Everything else, either boxed, sold, or thrown away. My life's been reduced to these few things." I sat frozen, barely able to breathe. I couldn't look at her without feeling like I had failed her. Like we all had. I left her apartment with that sick, metallic taste in my mouth that fear sometimes brings. Not fear of pain, but fear that nothing we build is safe. I sat in my car, parked on a cracked street under a flickering lamppost. My hands gripped the steering wheel, unmoving. A part of me, a loud part, said to let it go. Let the Johnsons take the cabin. Let Sharon win. What was I doing anyway? Trying to be some kind of local hero? That wasn't me. I wasn't a leader. I was the man who signed his divorce papers without protest. The man who let a landlord triple his rent and called it not worth the argument. What kind of man was I trying to be now? That's when my phone buzzed. "Mrs. Park." I hesitated for a second, then answered. "Alex," she whispered. Her voice was tight, frightened. "I'm scared." My heart sank. "What happened?" "She sent me a notice this morning. Said my trash bins were out of alignment. That's not a joke. She said I'm in violation of Ordinance B9. If I don't correct it in 24 hours, it escalates." There was a pause on the line, just the sound of breathing, quiet and uneven. "I can't afford to move again," she whispered. "My kids don't know what's happening. I don't want them to. Please, don't stop. Please." I closed my eyes. Outside my windshield, the lake shimmered faintly in the dark. I imagined my cabin, hollow and silent, boxes stacked in the kitchen. I saw Rodriguez's daughter asking about Santa. I saw Mrs. Johnson gripping her rocking chair like it was a lifeline. And I saw myself 10 years from now, in some windowless apartment, staring at parking lot gravel, wondering if I could have done something, if I had chosen not to fight. That night, I sat on my porch in silence. No music. No lights. Just the sound of the lake and the wind and the occasional creak of old wood. It used to soothe me, that sound. Now, it felt like a countdown. I pictured my home, my life, reduced to property lines and enforcement notices. I pictured the day they'd hand me a final eviction notice with a smile. But then I stood up. I clenched my fists and whispered to the darkness, "Not me. Not this time." I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew there had to be one. Because Sharon wasn't just evicting people. She was stealing their peace. Stealing their stories. And I couldn't let her take mine. When I got back inside, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat at the edge of my bed and opened an old photo album. My thumb brushed over a photo from years ago, me in a cheap office suit, arms awkward at my sides, standing next to a presentation board. I remembered that day vividly. I'd led the project. I'd done the legwork. But my manager had taken the credit. When I tried to speak up, he looked me in the eye and said, "You'll take this quietly, Alex." Like it wasn't advice. Like it was law. And I had. I'd taken it. Like I'd taken everything else. Never again. Back then, I told myself silence was strength. That avoiding conflict made me peaceful. But now I saw what that really meant. It meant erasure. It meant disappearing quietly, one compromise at a time. Sharon wasn't taking spreadsheets or promotions. She was uprooting people's lives and calling it order. I crossed the room and peered through the window. Across the lake, Sharon's sleek, modern house was lit up like a cruise ship. I picked up my binoculars and watched. She moved from room to room, pacing, talking on the phone. She looked calm, in control. But that control had a cost. And I was done paying it. The next afternoon, I walked the neighborhood with a stack of foam board signs under my arm. Mrs. Park stopped me outside her yard. "Alex," she said, her voice low. "What if she retaliates? What if this makes things worse for all of us?" Her eyes darted around nervously, like the trees might have microphones. I met her gaze. If I don't do this, she'll never stop. Today it's my house. Tomorrow it's yours. This is bigger than a mailbox. She feeds on silence. But if we all say something, she loses power. Mrs. Park didn't say a word. But she didn't stop me either. That night, I launched the first phase. I needed to trick the system that had tricked us. I needed a face for a movement. So I created one. I cycled through names: Lakeside Renewal, Lakeside Reshape, the New Lakeside Collective. All sounded like either tech startups or failed yoga retreats. Finally, I settled on Lakeside Modernization Initiative, LMI. It sounded exactly like something Sharon would believe in. Like bureaucracy disguised as vision. I built a fake website with a stock photo of pine trees silhouetted against dawn. I added a corporate slogan: Tomorrow's Lakeside, today. Then I recorded a voicemail using my best fake sales voice. Hi, yes, just following up on that parcel lot near Dockview Lane. LMI is ready to move fast if rezoning clears. Let us know. We're looking to close before the fiscal quarter. I played it back. It sounded real. It sounded dangerous. And I hated how easy it had become to pretend. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I had always been capable of this, I'd just been too afraid to try. The next evening, Bill and I cleared my kitchen table and rolled out an old neighborhood map. We marked intersections. Mailbox clusters. Walking routes. The places Sharon always passed, clipboard in hand. Push pins? He asked. Absolutely, I grinned. Rodriguez showed up late, bringing duct tape and beer. He moved like a man on a mission. You sure you weren't military? Bill joked, eyeing the careful layout of signs and placements. Only in spirit, Rodriguez replied, taping a sign to the underside of a park bench. I stepped back, watching the scene unfold, but something twisted in my chest. A fear I hadn't felt earlier. What if this goes too far? I asked quietly. What if we scare people? What if we make it worse? Rodriguez stopped. He looked me dead in the eyes. She already did that. And that was all he had to say. Underscore 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 underscore. You're just showing them the fire they've been pretending not to see, Rodriguez said, his voice low but steady, firm with conviction. Fear doesn't begin with you, Alex. It ends with truth. I nodded slowly. The guilt I carried didn't vanish, guilt over inciting panic, over possibly making things worse, but for the first time, it quieted. Just a little. And that was enough. That weekend, I went overboard. Obsessively, even. While others spent their days unwinding or grocery shopping or watching TV, I holed up in my cabin with the blinds drawn, feverishly constructing the illusion of a real threat. I drafted a press release with phrases so bloated with corporate nonsense they barely made sense, words like urban renewal catalyst and residential equity recalibration. I even set up a Gmail account with a fake title, Communications Director, LMI, Lakeside Modernization Initiative. Then I replied to a neighbor's inquiry with a paragraph so jargon-heavy it gave even me a headache. We appreciate your engagement. At this time, public discourse will be welcomed via stakeholder forums once the Phase 1 infrastructure audit concludes and regulatory consensus has been met. When Bill read it, he nearly spit his coffee all over my dining table. What the hell does that even mean? He asked, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Absolutely nothing, I said, grinning. But it sounds terrifying, right? We both burst into laughter. It was the first time in weeks I'd seen him genuinely amused. His shoulders, usually heavy with worry, lifted ever so slightly. It felt good. Not just because of the plan, but because, for a brief moment, we weren't drowning. And then the cracks began to show. Sharon called Ron, twice in one day. The second call I overheard from the sidewalk while passing by his house. Through the cracked kitchen window, I could hear his voice, sharp and tense. No, I didn't approve any signage, he said, pacing across the linoleum. I don't remember any discussion about development. A pause. Then, more clipped words. Well, maybe you should have looped in the board before making unilateral decisions. When he hung up, he didn't move for a moment. Just stood there, staring at nothing, rubbing his temples like he could massage the regret away. By Monday, the neighborhood was spiraling. One man stormed down the street, shouting into his phone, I need to know if my mortgage is at risk. What happens if the land value drops? A couple quietly loaded their SUV, glancing nervously at the houses around them. I overheard one of them mutter, "Let's list now, before it's too late." At the gas station, Bill told me someone asked the clerk where to submit their relocation paperwork. And all the while, Sharon sat in her home office, drowning in piles of HOA bylaws and sticky notes, her composure cracking like thin ice. She kept opening and closing her blinds like she couldn't decide whether to hide or perform. That night, I watched her from across the lake, binoculars pressed to my face. Her pacing was erratic. Barefoot. Her perfectly polished posture was gone. Her movements had become twitchy, uncertain. Her power was slipping, and she could feel it. I whispered into the darkness, "Now you know what it feels like." Then I lowered the binoculars, leaned back into the shadows of my porch, and let the full weight of what I'd set into motion settle on my chest. It wasn't over, not even close, but for the first time, I wasn't the one being hunted. I wasn't the victim, the coward, the man who stayed quiet while the world stepped over him. I was the spark now. Was it petty? Maybe. But it felt necessary. Because fear, once planted, grows roots fast. And I was done letting mine keep me still. Sharon wanted to play chess? Fine. I just flipped the board. That evening, I sat by my kitchen table with the lights off, the only illumination coming from my laptop screen. I'd made a folder on my desktop and labeled it, in bold capital letters, War. Inside it, I started dumping everything: screenshots of fines, copies of anonymous neighbor emails, photos of Rodriguez's empty front porch, Mrs. Park's warning letters. I didn't even know what I was building. Maybe a case, maybe a confession. Maybe just proof that this wasn't all in my head. And then something hit me, so suddenly and deeply I nearly gasped. People need to know this happens. Not just to me. To anyone. Anyone who's ever been bullied by someone with a tiny amount of power and way too much free time. Anyone who's watched a neighborhood turn cold because of one person's ego. I didn't know back then that I'd end up sharing this story. But if you're hearing it now, somehow, somewhere, it means maybe you've been through something like this, too. Maybe you've had your own Sharon. If so, I hope this helps you realize something I didn't know for far too long: you're not alone. Not anymore. That following Thursday, the community center looked like a courtroom built from leftover budget. Folding chairs lined up in crooked rows, each one creaking like old bones whenever someone shifted. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered. The walls were painted a tired beige, with the paint peeling at the corners. A dusty projector sat crooked on a metal cart at the front of the room. The air smelled faintly of instant coffee, paper, and something older, like time itself. One by one, the residents trickled in. I recognized some, others were strangers. Murmurs swirled. "Did you hear? What's really going on?" Near the back, a teenager angled their phone discreetly to record. An elderly man in a flannel jacket already looked like he might fall asleep. The energy in the room was jittery, like a storm before lightning. I stood near the doorway, my palms sweating. I told myself I had a plan. That all the whispers, signs, websites, and decoy calls had led to this moment. But doubt hit me like a wave of cold water. What if they don't believe me? What if this all backfires? Sharon had ruled this neighborhood like a private court for years. People didn't just follow her, they feared her. And if I stood up and failed, it wouldn't just be me who lost. It would be every person who had dared to hope this could change. At exactly 6:03, Sharon entered. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, heels clicking confidently on the tile, clipboard clutched under one arm. She smiled that same controlled, calculated smile I'd seen 100 times. A few people nodded, but others avoided eye contact. She took her seat at the head table, surrounded by neat stacks of folders, a plastic cup of water beside her. The projector screen behind her glowed faintly. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was smooth. Rehearsed. "I want to address the recent rumors about redevelopment in our community. I can assure you, those claims are false. They are intended to sow panic. There is no initiative. No threat to your homes." She clicked the remote. A slide popped up, neighborhood property value trends, with a vague bar graph most people couldn't interpret. "As you can see," she continued, "property values have increased under my leadership. This disruption stems from fabrications, likely from an external agitator, or perhaps someone who misunderstands the administrative process." She sipped her water. "We are investigating, and those responsible will be held accountable." I looked around the room. People fidgeted. A few brows furrowed. Then Ron stood up. His voice was soft, but it carried. "Sharon," he began, "last week, you asked me to sign paperwork for mailbox repairs. I didn't read it. I trusted you." The room went still. "Now I think you used my name for something else." A gasp escaped from somewhere near the back. Sharon's smile froze, lips pressed tight. "Ron," she said. "Those were standard authorizations. You've been on the board long enough to know that." He shook his head. "I didn't know what I was signing. And now half this neighborhood thinks they're being displaced." Then someone else stood, a woman near the middle. "Who approved all the fines?" she asked, voice sharp. "Why did my neighbor move out last month without saying goodbye?" Murmurs swelled. Suspicion sharpened. Someone else stood up, holding something in his hands. "Rodriguez. This is a drawing my daughter made," he said, voice cracking. "She drew it on our porch, the night before we had to leave. That porch is gone now." He held the drawing up. Crayon marks faded with time. A blue house with heart-shaped windows. A smiling family. "Sharon fined us until we couldn't breathe," he continued. "We lost our home. My daughter lost her home. You tell me how that helps property values." Silence followed. Thick. Suffocating. Then Mrs. Johnson rose slowly, clutching a faded wedding photo. "This is me and my husband. In front of our garden. The one I planted daisies in. Because my granddaughter loved them. That garden is gone now." And in that moment, the tide turned. Finally. People weren't whispering anymore. They were standing. Speaking. Remembering. And Sharon, once untouchable, now sat alone at her long table, blinking behind the glow of a projector no one believed in anymore. The fire had been lit. And for once, it wasn't burning us, it was lighting the way. "The house is gone. All because I planted daisies instead of marigolds." Her voice cracked as she spoke, her hands trembling as she held out the photo, an old one, worn at the edges, colors faded like memory. In the picture, she stood in front of her porch garden, smiling beside a man in a weathered sun hat. The daisies bloomed behind them like fireworks, defiant and bright. "I'm 75 years old," she said, voice thinning like thread. "I couldn't afford a lawyer. I lost everything." She held the photo like it was evidence in a courtroom, something sacred, something final. And for a moment, no one moved. Even the teenager in the back, the one who had been secretly recording the entire meeting, stopped. His phone lowered in his hand. His mouth hung open slightly, eyes wide. No one said a word. No one coughed or shifted or sighed. The silence became a physical thing in the room, a pressure, a presence. Sharon's posture stiffened behind the plastic fold-out table. Her lips thinned, her fingers twitched, and she reached for her stack of neatly organized notes as if paper could save her. Maybe she thought that logic or numbers or some carefully crafted talking point would be enough to wrest back control. But as she stood, the stack slipped from her arms and scattered across the tile in a chaotic flutter. Dozens of pages, agendas, fine logs, printouts, graphs, skidded across the floor like leaves in a windstorm. Not a single person moved to help her pick them up. I stood up slowly, knees weak, heart pounding loud in my ears. The silence didn't break. It deepened, thick and watchful. Every eye turned toward me. Some recognized me. Others didn't. But all of them were waiting. I looked around, at Rodriguez, who still held his daughter's crayon drawing like a shield. At Mrs. Johnson, clutching that old photo. Like it was all she had left of her life before the HOA turned it into a battlefield. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My chest tightened. Panic clawed at my spine. What if I messed this up? What if, instead of rallying them, I turned them against me? What if they saw me not as a whistleblower, but as an instigator, just another liar in a long chain of them? And then I saw her. Mrs. Park, standing near the back, holding her young son's hand. Her eyes were glassy with tears, but she met my gaze and nodded, just once, slow and certain. That small gesture steadied something inside me. That was enough. "I have something to say," I said, voice shaking. My mouth was dry, my hands colder than ice. But I took a step forward anyway. I created the fake development plan. The emails, the name, Lakeside Modernization Initiative. All of it. That was me. Not to hurt anyone, and definitely not to cause panic, but to show what it feels like, what it's like to live under the constant fear of losing your home. There were murmurs, quiet, confused, but no one interrupted. I kept going. I stepped forward because 3 weeks ago, Sharon sold my cabin. Without telling me. Said I violated too many rules. Said it was justified. Said the bylaws allowed it. But I wasn't the only one. She's fined people into silence. Into submission. She's erased porches and gardens and voices. She used Ron's signature, without his full knowledge, to approve documents none of us ever saw. I turned to face her. You built your power on silence, Sharon, I said. But we just stopped being quiet. She stared at me, her face pale. Her fingers twitched at her sides, no longer clutching paper or pens. Her whole body seemed to shrink, not physically, but in presence. She wasn't towering anymore. She wasn't the center of the room. She was just a woman surrounded by the consequences of her choices. The room held its breath. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't over, but it had changed. The tide had turned. And Sharon knew it, too. After the meeting, no one said much. People filed out slowly, a mix of tears, furrowed brows, and long, silent stares. Some leaned on each other. Some walked alone. Some just shook their heads like they just stepped out of a long, bad dream. Sharon didn't look back. She walked fast and stiff, head down, papers clutched against her chest like they could shield her from what was coming. But they couldn't. She didn't break stride. Didn't speak. Just kept walking, rigid as glass. Like if she stopped for even a moment, she might shatter. I stood on the curb with Rodriguez and Mrs. Johnson. We didn't speak either. The air around us felt changed, heavier, yes, but clearer too. It wasn't victory. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something more complicated. It felt like the moment after a storm, when the clouds have broken but everything's still wet. When you're still standing in puddles and debris, wondering what the damage really is. Wondering what comes next. I knew what exposed her. I knew the facade had cracked. But I also knew the reckoning hadn't arrived yet. Later that night, I sat in my cabin with all the lights off. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. My journal sat open in front of me, a pen resting on the page. But I couldn't write. So I picked up my phone instead. Opened the recorder app. Pressed the red circle. What do you do after justice? I whispered into the mic, after you finally win? My voice sounded foreign. Detached. Like someone else was speaking. Why does it feel like nothing's changed? I let the silence answer. Across the street, Sharon's house stood like a tomb. Grass grew wild around the edges of her walk. The hedges were overgrown now, pushing up against the fence like they were trying to escape. The tulips she used to plant, so perfect, so symmetrical, were gone. Just dirt and silence now. The windows were closed. The blinds drawn. No decorations. No flags. No signs of life. Someone had stuffed a note into her mailbox the week before. Typed. Anonymous. It read, "Justice tastes bitter, doesn't it?" The ink was clean. The message was clear. No signature. Just vengeance. Word got around fast. One neighbor said she'd been turned away at Brookside Market. That when she approached the counter, the cashier suddenly needed a break. Another claimed someone dumped birdseed on her windshield with a note that said, "Feed the pigeons, not your ego." The mob didn't wear hoods anymore. They didn't light torches or chant. They just clicked send. Or looked away. Or whispered in grocery aisles. They erased her not with fire, but with absence. I saw her again 3 days later, at Mitchell's Market. I was grabbing frozen peas and coffee when I noticed her in the checkout line, standing completely alone. The woman in front of her glanced back, recognized her, and then pulled her cart to another register without saying a word. The cashier faltered mid-smile. Sharon's hands shook as she placed her items on the belt. Then she saw me. Her lips moved before her voice did. "I gave order to chaos," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Now there's nothing but mud." I stood there, unsure. "You gave control," I said finally. "To fear." She nodded once. There was no anger in her expression anymore. Just something hollow. Something exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. A few days later, the police knocked on my door. There were no sirens. No shouting. Just 2 calm knocks on the wood. I opened the door with clammy hands. 2 officers stood there, one tall, bald, clipboard in hand. The other younger, fidgeting, eyes unsure. "Mr. Reed," the tall one asked. "We're following up on some irregular HOA filings. Land transfers, citation records, disclosure issues. May we speak inside?" My heart pounded. I thought about running. Then I thought about lying. Instead, I nodded. "I have everything documented," I said, voice cracking. Right here. I opened a binder with trembling hands. Showed them every email, every screenshot, every timeline I'd built. The younger officer asked carefully, "Did you collect any money from these development plans?" "No. Never," I said. "It was fake. A decoy. I was trying to expose abuse." The two exchanged glances. The older one smirked faintly. "You wouldn't believe what people do to get out of HOA fines," he said. "I would," I answered. "I lived it." After an hour of questions, they left. As they stepped off the porch, the younger officer turned back. "My aunt got fined $200 for a wind chime," he said. "Too close to her neighbor's fence. HOAs, man. They start with a smile and end with a summons." That evening, a man I didn't know came to my door. He had calloused hands. Worn jeans. Eyes that had seen too much. "Name's Marcus," he said. "Single dad. Was trying to buy a house nearby. I was about to close before your fake development thing happened. Now the bank's backing out." I felt my stomach drop. "I didn't mean," I began. He raised a hand. "Just, next time you want to teach someone a lesson, don't burn everyone else's calendar." I apologized. Genuinely. He nodded, but didn't smile. Then he walked away. The ripples didn't stop there. Bill and Rodriguez started a group, the New Neighbors Coalition. Their first meeting was held in the park under string lights. 20 people came. Rodriguez brought iced tea. Bill handed out flyers. First item on the agenda, amend the HOA charter. 2 days later, I got an email from Karen Tron. Attorney. Works for Fair Communities United. "We monitor HOA abuse cases," she wrote. "We heard about you. If you need legal help, we're here." An army I didn't ask for. But maybe needed. One night, Ron showed up at my door with a sealed envelope. "She wrote this 6 months ago," he said. "Sharon." Gave it to the board. No one read it. Inside was a letter, typed, careful. A proposal. Reduce fines. Offer appeals. Require community input. It was dated 3 months before she listed my cabin for sale. "She used to cry at night," Ron said softly. "Said rules were the only thing people respected her for." I read it again and again. Was it her first plan, or her final defense? That night, I sat by the lake, holding the letter like it was burning my hands. The moon shimmered on the water. I thought of Mrs. Johnson. Marcus. Rodriguez. Sharon. Myself. And I asked the question into the dark. Would you forgive the hand that almost took your home, if that hand had once tried to protect it? It started with one screw. Bill approached the HOA office that morning with nothing more than a cordless drill and the quiet resolve of a man who'd waited too long to be heard. Without fanfare, without a word, he unscrewed the top left bolt of the Lakeside Neighborhood Authority sign. The drill whirred softly, like the sound of justice arriving with a whisper instead of a bang. Mrs. Park was the first to notice. She stepped forward slowly, pulled out her phone, and started recording. Then came Rodriguez, silent as always but steady in step. Then the new guy, Marcus, the single dad from Lot 19, joined them. By sunset, the sign lay in the grass, dismantled piece by piece. No one stopped them. No one yelled. No clipboard-wielding enforcer came out of the office to protest. Sharon watched from behind the blinds of her living room, barely visible, just a shadow of the woman who had once dictated citations and fines like a queen issuing decrees. But now she just stood there, rigid and motionless, like she was witnessing her own funeral. The video hit the community board by nightfall. 600 shares in under 3 hours. Its caption, "Power built on fear falls faster than it rises." The next morning, the sunlight crept into my cabin gently, one slow beam at a time. I sat at the kitchen table, a chipped coffee mug in hand, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the worn groove on the armrest. My ex-wife had once knocked over a lamp during an argument, and it had gouged the wood. That mark was smooth now, softened by years and elbows. Outside, the lake shimmered as if it had never borne witness to lies or betrayal. I closed my eyes and whispered to the stillness, "Still here." A local paper ran a front-page story, "Fake Development Project Unmasks HOA Corruption." My cabin was featured in the photo, sun flaring over its shingles. Just beneath it, a blurry image of Sharon, head bowed, in handcuffs. My name showed up in the second paragraph. They called me a whistleblower. I didn't feel like one. I wasn't brave, just tired of swallowing silence, tired of watching people be stripped of their homes under the guise of order. A week later, I got an email from a podcast producer. Civil Voices. They were doing a segment on small-town power abuse and wanted to interview me. I recorded my story in one take, sitting alone in the cabin with only the buzz of crickets outside. When the host asked, "What made you fight back?" I said, "Because when someone puts a for sale sign on your porch, you either pack up, or you tear it down." That line must have stuck, because 2 weeks later, the town hosted an event called Reclaim the Lake Day. Bill handed me a flyer at the general store with a wink. I showed up expecting a few folding chairs and a cooler of lemonade. Instead, I found banners reading, "Homes are for healing, not hoarding power." Kids drew stick figures holding hands in sidewalk chalk. Someone passed me a paintbrush and asked if I'd help repaint the community bulletin board. So I did. Sharon hadn't disappeared. Word spread that she wrote handwritten letters to every household before her court date. Ron brought mine over, sealed in a plain white envelope. I stood on the porch, staring at it for a long time before opening it. Her handwriting was small, sharp. The letter read, "I tried to build walls to keep pain out. I ended up trapping myself inside. I'm sorry." For a moment, I wanted to throw it into the fire pit. But instead, I folded it neatly and tucked it into the back of a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I also didn't want to forget. Sharon wasn't evil. She was just someone who believed control might protect her from falling apart. We all have our armor. I started noticing little signs of healing everywhere. Mrs. Johnson sent me a picture of her new apartment, sunlight streaming through the window, a clay pot on the sill. Yellow daisies bloomed inside. She'd mislabeled them again, called them chrysanthemums. I didn't correct her. Rodriguez invited me over to help build a treehouse. His daughter had drawn blueprints in crayon, and he was following them to the letter. "She wants a slide," he said, laughing. "So she gets a slide." Every nail he drove in felt like a declaration. Mrs. Park returned to her tomato garden. One day, she handed me a jar of kimchi and said softly, "You saved us." I shook my head. No. I just reminded everyone they weren't alone. There were no parades. No victory speeches. But the fences were lower now. A boy painted a mural on the back of his shed, of a lake, a cabin, and the word "stay." One morning, I took the boat out. The lake was glass. I brought only one thing, an old wooden yardstick. Sharon's favorite tool of enforcement. At the center of the lake, I held it to the light, saw the faded black ink, 6 inches, 12 inches. I whispered, "Some rules are meant to be buried." Then I let it go. It floated for a moment, then sank. And as the last ripple disappeared, I turned back toward shore, not victorious, just free. The end.